Hi, and welcome back to Finding Mojo. I'm your host, Pete Ball, and today I'm going to read to you the first chapter of the second book in the Magi series, Silentium, where we continue to find out how Milo's doing on his way to the Middle East. Chapter 1. Milo, Captain Leif Jorgensen cried over the rising wind. Milo could see the captain waving him over and proceeded to make his way carefully along the windward rail of the ship, never releasing more than one hand at a time. The mid-sized vessel was rigged with a single mainmast carrying a square sail, a raised forecastle, lower central deck, and a high raised aft deck where the helm was situated. Milo had been standing on the main deck just forward of the helm when he was summoned. The ship's motion was violent, and breaking waves occasionally swept the deck in icy, ankle-deep seawater. It was the worst storm he'd witnessed in his month at sea since departing Venice. When he finally reached the young captain's side, he was soaking wet. He wiped seawater from his face before grabbing onto the railing in front of the wheel. Leif wore a sheepskin jacket. Milo noticed how the water beaded on its natural oiled surface. As the young Dane wrestled the wheel back under control, his long braids flailed out behind his head. "We'll need to reduce sail further. Do you mind helping the crew?" he shouted over the howling wind. Milo nodded, despite the lump of fear catching in his throat. He saw two crew members struggling with lowering the already reefed heavy mainsail. He knew what was needed and began to make his way forward cautiously. After only a week at sea, Milo had become seconded to assistant crew when one crew member jumped ship in a Greek port. He was bored by the endless day at sea and jumped at the chance of having something to do. Milo had enjoyed learning to crew a ship, and despite the danger, he felt a thrill of excitement as he struggled to make forward progress along the pitching deck. The Midnight Sun was not an Italian vessel. The captain was of Danish origin, a true descendant of his Viking forebears, and proud of it. He was not exactly forthcoming, however, regarding his presence in the Mediterranean, so far from his homeland. He'd made Venice his home port and spoke some Italian, but the rest of the crew were from different parts, and few, if any, spoke the same language. Leif had devised a set of hand signals that covered most tasks aboard to alleviate the communication problems. The two Milo was going to assist were from Spain and Greece, and each cursed in his own tongue as they fought to tame the flogging canvas. The Greek, who was handling the halyard, indicated to Milo that he wanted him to take over, lowering the sail, so he could help the other with rolling it up. He used the sign for slowly and emphasized it with a shout in his own language. Milo nodded and took hold of the thick line. The sail was surprisingly heavy. Wet with spray, it almost lifted him off his feet as he braced himself against the mast. He looped the rope under a heavy wooden cleat to create friction, slowing the descent of the heavy flogging sail. The only thing keeping the crew on board was their grip on the rough canvas as they strove to reduce it to just 1/3 its original size and tie in reefing points. The bow rose and fell over the waves, making this simple task almost impossible as the vessel tried to buck them overboard with each crest. Their skill and strength prevailed, however, and once secured, the Greek hauled on the halyard to tension the head of the sail. Leif eased their course slightly to run before the seas, and the wild motion settled down to a rolling one. All three returned to the aft end of the deck, just below the steering position, and tied themselves to a strong point there. While this third reef did settle the vessel, it was soon apparent that the wind strength was still building. Along with the size of the waves, it became clear that there was still too much sail. Milo climbed cautiously back to the helm position, using the rising motion of the vessel to move, while the dropping motion caused him to pause in his progress and hang on. When he finally reached the captain, he cried over the noise, "Better!" Life looked around at the sea and sky, then back to the rolling motion of his vessel, and shook his head. "Still, it grows stronger. I feel we may need to go under bare poles." Milo nodded, knowing that meant another trip to the exposed deck to drop the sail. They were the only 4 out there, as the captain had sent all the passengers below for their own safety. Milo noticed his new friend, Raffiano, hunched over a bucket on the floor of the deck, clinging to the rail with one hand and the bucket with another. After a few moments' deliberation, Life cried, "Yes, let's drop it all together." Milo nodded and moved cautiously forward to tell the crew. He patted Raffiano on the shoulder as he passed, and his friend looked up miserably, then returned to his contemplation of the bucket and its swirling contents. No delicacy was required now, as the halyard was simply released, allowing the rest of the sail to fall, but the Spaniard lost his footing, thrust his hand out to grab the sail, but fell backwards, striking his head hard on the main deck, where he lay motionless. There was no time to see him, however, as the fallen sail had bagged out with the wind and was now flogging ferociously. Milo acted without thought and recklessly dived into the inflated body of the sail, clutching at it with his fingernails, trying desperately to tame it. The Greek crewmen did the same, and their combined weight held it firmly in place as Raffiano struggled to his feet to help them. Between them they managed to roll up the remaining loose sail and tie it both around itself and to a strong point on deck. Then they went to check on their crewmate. They found him half underwater and sliding along the deck like a sack of grain. With a hand under each arm, he was swiftly lifted and dragged to the companionway and hauled below deck. Milo's training at the monastery hospice lent him a practiced air as he called for a lamp and immediately began to inspect the man for injuries. It was dim below deck and smelled of vomit and fear. The passengers were, as usual, pilgrims on their way to the Holy Land. Many had never been to sea, and most were miserable with seasickness and fear of the stormy conditions. Milo inspected the cut on the Spaniard's forehead and dismissed it as superficial, but the way his hung limply suggested it was broken. Milo pinched the man's cheek and called his name. The Spaniard slowly resumed consciousness and stared blankly at him. Then a look of fear clouded his face as he realised what had happened. He cried out in Spanish, but was immediately calmed by his Greek friend's hand on his shoulder. Milo called, asking for bandages and a blanket. When the crewman was made comfortable, someone offered him wine for the pain, and he threw back a few gulps, then winced in pain as Milo bandaged up his arm, then cleaned the cut on his forehead. "You're lucky you didn't fall overboard, my friend," Raffiano teased jovially as the Spaniard tried to smile. Milo took a wooden belaying pin to make a splint. As he strapped it to the damaged arm, the man vomited with the pain and shock. Those watching winced, and some turned away. "This man cannot work and needs rest," Milo declared. "Can anyone else help crew the ship?" Raffiano nodded. "I'll do it." Milo smiled at his friend. He knew that this adventurer and trader was more at home making deals, drinking in bars and chasing women than crewing a ship. But he appreciated his courage. "Good. Please inform the captain that the Spaniard is okay but unable to work and that you'll take his place," Milo said, rather authoritatively despite his youth. Raffiano nodded and immediately climbed out through the doorway to the open deck and its attendant hazards. The drama over, most onlookers went back to their secure places to ride out the storm, and the Greek returned to the deck. Milo noticed the pale colour of the injured man's complexion, and the beads of sweat on his upper lip indicated that he was in great pain and going into shock. Instinctively, he held his hands over the injured arm and whispered a healing prayer. In his mind's eye, a glowing light appeared under his hands, and they felt warm, almost hot. The man groaned, then seemed to relax and fall into a restful state. Milo sat by his side and wondered what would happen to them all if this storm did not abate. He recalled the gathering of the ship's captains before setting sail from Venice, how they'd cautioned a delay until the spring, but King Frederick II insisted that this crusade could not be delayed. He would not be dissuaded, and so they departed, despite warnings of the severe winter storms. They were in the hands of the gods now, and Milo said a silent prayer to the goddess. End of chapter 1. Magi, Silentium. It's available on Amazon. It's an ebook, a paperback, and it's also available on Kindle Unlimited. I'll leave the link below. Thanks for listening. Have a nice day.